Hi, everybody. It is so wonderful to be here and to meet all of you and all the speakers that we have had so far. I'm so proud to be part of this conversation. And I wanted to start off before we get into introductions and to the formal part of our presentations. I just wanted to speak to the importance of having these systems level conversations. We so rarely get to all be in the same room together. And we're all here for the benefit of the children that we service, and we can't do this one without the other. So, based on some of the things I've already heard, we're all talking the same language, but we're, as Mrs. Ezel so eloquently put it, we're all using different lingo, which leads to miscommunication sometimes. But there are themes throughout everything that I'm hearing so far here today. And as Dr. Duncan said, advocacy on behalf of our children is of the utmost importance in figuring out how we can all participate in those advocacy efforts. This being one of them is an exciting opportunity. The need for legislation, when we talk about services that are available to our children and our families, sometimes we're so limited by the resources that we have. So I really liked Dr. Duncan pointing that out. As physicians, they can be involved in that. As educators and as parents, we can all have an effort together as a team. I also heard another very important word that I often use when I meet with families, and that's partnership. This is meant to be a partnership, and that's what I hope comes through. Additionally, I would love to be a part of any panel that incorporates parent advocacy and parent knowledge and empowerment. If I was in charge of the school system that I'm in, I would advocate for a social worker in every school that helps families with the process that can result in so much frustration. But unfortunately, that goes back to that systems level conversation and legislation. We don't have the funding for that, and it is so frustrating. So again, before we continue with our formal presentation, I'm just immensely proud to be part of this conversation and to represent the schools who are here for our kiddos and our families.
Assessment Specialist with the Premier Program at UT Health San Antonio. For our next presentation, we will discuss special education evaluation, services, and early childhood instruction in Texas public schools. We have put together a panel of some wonderful ladies from the Northside Independent School District here in San Antonio. Joanna Perez is a licensed specialist in school psychology who participates with one of the district's preschool assessment teams. Barbara Triplett is an instructional specialist who oversees the district's pre-kinder and kindergarten programs. And Lori Owen is an instructional support teacher for Northside's early childhood education staff. The ladies will spend about 10 minutes on each of these topics: evaluation, programs and services, and pre-kinder and kindergarten school readiness and instruction. And then we will have a time for questions and answers from the audience. You may type your questions in the chat box as our presentation recording plays. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible during the question and answer portion. And now I will pass it off to Joanna with evaluation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for participating in this very important conversation. Let's start by talking about the transition process and the responsibilities of the school district to children who are currently receiving early childhood intervention services. The school district must fulfill its child find responsibilities, meaning school district staff must identify and evaluate any child suspected of having a disability. This process is based on state regulations. The transition conference, or the transition meeting, is the first step of that process. After obtaining parental consent, the early childhood intervention provider, the parent, and a school district representative will meet to share information. You may decline to meet with the school district if you'd like. However, if you choose to continue with the process, a meeting will be scheduled at least 90 days before your child turns 3. Meeting at least 90 days before the child's 3rd birthday ensures enough time for the full transition process to be completed by the child's 3rd birthday. This includes several steps, specifically the transition meeting, the full evaluation, and eligibility determination. We will talk about this in more detail as we move through today's presentation. If you are the parent of a child who is not currently receiving early childhood intervention services, don't worry. Irregardless of whether a child is receiving early childhood intervention services, a school must fulfill its child find responsibilities. A parent may contact the local school district and make a referral for special education evaluation at any time. The special education evaluation process involves many steps. Broadly speaking, the evaluation process follows a general framework, beginning with parental consent for the evaluation, during which your rights as a parent will be discussed. This is followed by establishing the evaluation team, gathering data to determine disability, compiling a full and individual initial evaluation report, or FIIE, writing an individualized education plan at the ARD meeting, and finally, implementing services. The full and individual initial evaluation is a comprehensive assessment during which information and data is gathered. It serves to inform the ARD committee about the child's disability and need for specially designed instruction or educational need. School districts follow federal and state guidelines throughout this process to ensure such things as confidentiality, appropriate tests to be considered, and relevant cultural factors. In order for a child to receive special education services, the child must meet criteria for one or more of the 13 disability categories identified in federal and state law. Speech impairment, autism, and other health impairment are the disability categories most frequently encountered in early childhood. The full and individual initial evaluation, or the FIIE, which I briefly mentioned earlier, is an important part of the transition process. The FIIE is a comprehensive assessment of a child's skills and abilities. It is typically conducted by a multidisciplinary team. However, the team members participating in the evaluation will vary depending on the child's needs and the family's concerns. Most frequently, you can expect to meet with a speech and language pathologist and a school psychologist. Other team members might include an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a special education teacher, a teacher for the deaf or hard of hearing, an audiologist, a teacher for children with visual impairments, an assistive technology specialist, and a nurse. Each member of the evaluation team will gather information in their area of expertise, and the team will work together to compile an evaluation report based on that information that was gathered throughout this evaluation process. The FIIE report must include information regarding the child's speech and language skills, which primarily includes how well the child expresses him or herself, how much the child understands, the intelligibility of the child's speech, and the child's social use of language. Physical skills, including fine and gross motor development, and information regarding health conditions are addressed in the report. Emotional and behavioral development is considered and encompasses the child's social skills, as well as emotional and behavioral regulation. Information regarding intellectual functioning and adaptive skills, or the child's ability to take care of his or her needs appropriately for their age, is part of the comprehensive report. The child's educational performance, need for assistive technology, and pertinent sociological factors round out the comprehensive evaluation report. There is no one right way to gather information for the full and individual evaluation report. The team has a variety of tools available to them for data gathering purposes. This may include review of records, information from parents, both formal and informal, standardized assessment completed directly with the child, informal assessment of the child's skills completed through observations or interviews with parents and or caregivers, and information from medical providers if necessary. Disability determination is based on the child's performance as it compares to what is generally expected of same age peers. In order for a child to be found eligible for special education services, an educational need must be identified during the evaluation. When examining whether a child's disabilities are impacting educational progress, it is important for parents and schools to consider not only the impact of the child's grades or test scores and academic process, but also whether the disability is impacting the child's social skills development, emotional behavioral progress, adaptive skills or activities of daily living, and functioning in a general classroom setting. Frequently, children with medical diagnoses undergo an educational evaluation. When considering the needs of a child with a medical diagnosis, the evaluation team makes a distinction between the medical needs of a child and an educational disability. A medical diagnosis is made by a medical provider with the goal of determining a treatment plan or cure. An educational disability, however, is determined by the school-based team. A child with a medical diagnosis must also meet criteria for one or more of the 13 disability conditions based on federal and state criteria. The child's medical condition must impact his or her educational progress or functioning in an educational setting. The goal of an educational disability is access to a free and appropriate public education. The transition and evaluation process concludes with an ARD meeting held by the child's school. The participants of the meeting make final decisions about the child's eligibility for special education services and develop an individualized education plan as appropriate. The ARD committee must consider any clinical evaluations obtained by the parent. Procedural safeguards are in place in order to ensure that the rights of a child with a disability are protected, and this resource has been made available to you. Again, state guidelines indicate that this process, which includes the transition meeting, the evaluation, the writing of the evaluation report, and the meeting of the ARD committee, must be completed by the child's 3rd birthday if the child participated in early childhood intervention services. There is no one-size-fits-all answer when a child is not found to be eligible for special education services, but a parent continues to have concerns. The solution is going to depend on the concern and the child's age. If the concerns are medical in nature, the family might choose to focus on medical treatment or therapy through a private agency or medical provider. If the concerns are social or academic in nature, the family might choose to pursue community-based programs such as Head Start. If the child is school age, intervention can be provided through the multi-tiered systems of support or response to intervention process. A variety of accommodations can be implemented through a 504 plan for a school-age child. Thank you for your time.
We're now going to talk about early childhood special education programs and services. This resource has also been provided for you. It's called The Parent's Guide to the Admission, Review, and Dismissal Process. And it's where I got a lot of the information for my portion of this presentation. An ARD, A-R-D, is an admission, review, and dismissal meeting. Its primary purpose is to form an IEP, Individual Education Plan. And I know we'll have a lot of acronyms as we go through here. So we'll try to give you those out as we go. If your child qualifies as a child with a disability and is eligible for programming and services, it's an admission meeting. That's the first meeting they ever have, held after that initial evaluation report is completed. And it determines that your child is eligible. Every year, as long as they're in need of services, you'll have an annual review. If at any time your child is no longer in need of special education services, we call that the dismissal. It's held when they're no longer eligible or in need. Again, the ARD primary purpose is to develop the individual education plan. According to our guidelines, there's certain people that are required to attend, such as you, the parent, a general education teacher, because all of our students in the public school system start as general education students, a special education teacher who's typically their case manager, a representative of the school or the district, and a person who can interpret the evaluation results. Typically, that's the school psychologist or the speech and language pathologist. May also include as applicable a language support teacher if your child is identified as an English learner, any related service providers such as occupational therapists, physical therapists. If your child has an auditory or visual impairment, then that staff would attend. If your child has a visual impairment, an orientation and mobility specialist will be part of the ARD committee. And of course, any other individuals can be included who have knowledge or special expertise regarding the child. There are some major components of the IEP that are what we call required. Those would be the PLAF, another acronym. Those are your child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Those are written first because they drive what do we need to work on? What are the critical needs that we want to write goals for? Part of that plan is a description of the services and the placement that the child will be provided. The IEP will contain information regarding how your child will participate in assessments when they're in school. And then when appropriate, we'll start talking about transition services. So programs and related services are those services that support the individual education plan through integration of direct and indirect student interventions, as well as collaboration, consultation with the educational team to provide students with access and participation in their school day. Specifically, early childhood special education. It is any special education service for children ages 3 through 5 as decided by their ARD committee. And we do have a continuum of services for that age range. All students are general education students first. It's the job of the special education staff to help them access and progress in the general education setting. We're required to consider LRE, least restrictive environment, when planning a child's programming. This continuum illustrated here runs from least restrictive to the most restrictive. Typical 3-year-olds are cared for by family, friends, or maybe in a daycare setting or Mother's Day out. So removing them from that typical setting for 30 minutes once a week for drop-in speech, if all their need is for speech therapy, would be the least restrictive environment. Along that continuum, we do have classroom settings. In a collaborative ECSE classroom, They're with typical preschool children the entire time they attend. As we move in on that continuum in a specialized instructional classroom, they spend most of their time primarily with other children that also have special needs. A specialized unit is the most restrictive because most of the time that means attending another school outside of your attendance area, as we only have a few of these highly specialized units in our district. So let's look at those programs and related services that fall under that ECSE umbrella. Related services may be speech therapy with a speech pathologist, occupational therapy or physical therapy. Maybe they need adaptive physical education once they are in a grade level that participates in PE, such as kindergarten through and up. We do have a program for the deaf and hard of hearing, and typically that would also involve the audiology program and specialists. We do have staff that specialize in autism under our autism program. And we have services for the visually impaired, which always includes orientation and mobility specialists. If your child requires treatments and procedures performed while they're at school, the school nurse will perform a school health service assessment. This is a collaboration with your physicians. It includes doctor's orders and the school nurse. And she helps determine what types of skilled nursing treatments and procedures would be required, and if there were any non-skilled nursing services that the child would need while at school. Personal duty nurses, or what we call PDAs, are permitted, and the district has guidelines and procedures that can be shared with any family that's interested in having a PDA with their child while at school. We do have a campus in the medical center area for children whose health needs would benefit most from that setting. That's the Nellie Reddick's campus. And if your child, we have homebound services if your child's health requires them to stay home and receive their educational support there.
All right, so now it's my turn to talk a little bit about the classroom environments, and I represent the general ed part of this puzzle and hopefully can give you some insight on the different classroom models, go a little deeper into the instructional practices and the teachers that support these settings, and include some of the resources, teacher qualifications, and opportunities that we make available for all of our students here in Northside. I love this quote. The children that come to us are not blank slates when they enter kindergarten. For example, there have been 1,825 days that child has experienced and soaked up information and learned before they ever enter our building. For pre-K, that number's around 1,460 days before they enter pre-kinder. These days reflect and acknowledge, which I think is really important, the role of the parents as the children's first teachers, the potential impact of pre-formal information or instructional settings like daycare or home care, nannies, supports and interventions that have taken place before they entered the school setting, and then of course the tremendous impact of a child's culture, their experiences, and their environmental factors. To dismiss these crucial days would diminish opportunities to meaningfully engage not only with the children, but with their families, and would miss a critical opportunity to build on the early successes that have taken place. So what do we know about early childhood? Research drives our very existence in early childhood. Building on the work of philosophers such as Piaget, Erikson, Montessori, and Vygotsky, a lot of energy and support has shifted to supporting high quality early childhood experiences. This energy and support is often channeled through policy and legislation. Most recently in Texas, House Bill 3 has had a tremendous impact on many things, but most importantly to the access and equity for our youngest learners. In addition to other things, this bill also advocated for full-day pre-K for all, noting that having that opportunity to access high-quality assessments and learning environments would benefit all. So here are some of the benefits that we know are most impactful for our youngest learners. So we know that children who participate in high-quality early childhood programs are more likely to be school-ready with the support of certified teachers. We know that the environment, the teachers, and the resources and supports help develop oral language and skill development. There's a heavy focus on social and emotional skills, and that when children are in the public school system, they have the ability to access wraparound services as well. Huge emphasis on early literacy skills, knowing that we want our children to love reading and be strong, capable readers, and that our target goal is by 3rd grade, knowing that reading is the foundation for all other contents as they move through the school system. We put emphasis on a play-based instructional approach, recognizing the role of developmentally appropriate practices. We know that these are 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. We know that the ways that they learn best, and we make sure that that happens in our settings. And finally, the benefit of a high-quality early childhood education program is that it's a proactive approach to meeting needs instead of a reactive approach to intervention. So we try to fill what we could perceive as potential gaps or struggles that these children might face for a variety of reasons, and build and support systems so that hopefully we can fix those things before they enter the more content-heavy grade levels, such as first through 5th grade in the elementary school setting. Okay, so what does it take to be to qualify for pre-kindergarten in Texas? These qualifications are established by TEA. So they need to have a language other than English spoken at home, and will be tested to see their proficiency level in that. They could be educationally disadvantaged, and this is tied to socioeconomic status. Homeless would be a qualifying indicator, military dependent, in foster care, or a Star of Texas Award recipient. So what do our students need to learn by the end of their first year in pre-K? So this is guided by the Texas Pre-Kindergarten Guidelines, or they're often referred to as the standards. And so if that instruction is tied to these guidelines, our anticipated result is that by the end of the year, our students will be able to speak in complete sentences, that they'll be able to self-regulate, take turns, build relationships with their peers, that they'll be able to retell a story, that they can identify rhyming words and alliteration, that they'll recognize at least 20 letters and be able to write their name. We hope that they'll be able to count to 30 by rote memory, and then recognize numbers 0 through 9 and build sets with numbers 0 through 9, and then extend a simple pattern. So what does a pre-kindergarten classroom look like to help support these pretty lofty goals, right? So in Northside, we use the high scope instructional framework. And what that does is, again, based on that ever important research, knowing how children learn best, it shows us what components should be in the day. So that includes things as small group, outdoor play, large group, music and movement, and the content areas, but how much time, what's appropriate for a 4-year-old? We know that a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old shouldn't be sitting on the floor for an hour, right? And so this framework helps drive what our schedule and our programming could look like or should look like. In Northside, we have standardized learning environments, and we achieve this by, one, providing a lot of the furniture and the instructional materials, but also going out and giving guidance on how to set it up and having check-ins to make sure that it's set up correctly and has all the necessary materials, and can include some cultural activities, learning and literacy and math in all of our areas. We in Northside use a locally created curriculum, again, with this idea that it's not a one size fits all, and we want to meet the differentiated needs of all of our students. While we have a backbone curriculum, we look at every single learning opportunity and connect it with as many resources that we feel our teachers would like to have or need to have so they can provide that differentiated support for the students in their classroom. A typical pre-K classroom could have children anywhere from the age of 3 to newly 5. And so making sure that our teachers are equipped is huge. We mentioned those high quality checklists. That's something that Lori's department and my department take very seriously. We go out not only to support, but to give feedback to help build a strong program. Part of House Bill 3 and something that our department offers is 15 hours yearly of coaching. This can look like in-class support. This could be participating in planning sessions or working with teachers one-on-one on specific goals. We also provide a minimum, although it's much more of that, than 15 hours of yearly early childhood specific professional development. So knowing the unique and individual needs of our students, we want to make sure our teachers have the most up-to-date research-based information on how to work with them. And then, of course, we have inclusive and collaborative settings on the full continuum of classrooms for our pre-K students. So kindergarten, what do we know about qualifying for kindergarten? In Texas, although kindergarten is optional, most children opt, or most parents opt in to participate. It's for any child who turns 5 by September 1st of that year. So there's no other qualification other than that. And in Northside, you just need to live within our boundaries. So what happens when they come to us and what are the benefits? So in Northside, your kindergarten teachers are early childhood certified teachers. They often have additional certifications. We do have bilingual and dual language classrooms, and so those teachers would need those specific certifications. We have ESL classrooms for children who speak languages other than Spanish, and so your teachers are highly qualified and highly certified. In Texas, it is required that our kindergarten teachers have a certain number of professional development in the area of gifted and talented. It's interesting to me that it's kindergarten teachers and then advanced placement high school teachers. That's who needs to have that training. It begins with 30 hours their first year and then 6 hours every year after that. I think that's a nod and an acknowledgement to the wide variety of students that we have within one classroom, and again, prepares those teachers to meet the diverse needs of whoever walks in that door. Also part of House Bill 3 was a new initiative called the TEA Texas Reading Academies. This is for kinder, first, second, and third grade teachers. It's a 60-hour, basically a college course that's all around the science of reading. So again, I mentioned a little earlier that goal of getting our children reading on level by third grade. We know how important it is that foundation is set solid, and the state has provided some additional professional development to make sure that we are all in the same place and calibrated in our expectations and instructions. So for kindergarten, and this is actually kinder through 12th grade, their standards are called the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, often referred to as the TEKS. And so again, this is how instructional decisions are made, curriculum is developed, and how the teachers drive their instruction and assess progress on all of their students. By the end of kindergarten, our hope is that our students would be able to recognize all letters and sounds, be able to write their first and last name, read instructionally on a guided reading level D, and that correlates with Fountas and Pinnell. They are the gold standard of reading instruction. That they'll be able to write or dictate a story with a beginning, middle, and end, that they can count to 100 from any given number, that they can solve simple story problems, and they can analyze data using graphs. And this isn't a totally inclusive list, but these are some of the highlights of what our expectations would be for the end of the school year. So what does that kindergarten classroom look like? I mentioned those 6 hours of yearly GT hours after the initial 30. So that's really important. Again, we use a locally created curriculum. We are not a one-size-fits-all shop. We recognize that kids need different things, and we want to make sure our teachers are prepared for that. Many of our campuses, well, all of our campuses actually have campus specialist support, such as reading teachers and math staff developers, in addition to some specialized people depending on how the campus is set up. So you might find language support teachers at some campuses with high numbers of bilingual or ESL students. But it's nice that that specialist support is on campus and ready to help whenever needed. We have tech-based assessments and interventions available for our students. Again, the impact of those Texas Reading Academies. We do implement campus-based interventions depending on the needs of our students, with this emphasis again on that play-based instructional opportunities. And just like pre-K, we have inclusive and collaborative settings for all students. So here's the big question. What if they aren't ready? Well, this goes back to where we started. We don't have one size fits all children. No one's a blank slate, and we recognize that. So what do? We meet them where they are at. So we ground ourselves in what we consider and what research says is best practices. So we focus on that balance of play-based instruction and then the academic rigor that we know that we're held accountable for, right? The state is very clear about that. So we take a lot of effort and energy to make sure we provide that balance and stay focused on what's good for our young population of students. We have responsive interventions. So using research-based, evidence-based practices, and that could look in many different ways. Sometimes it's a tech-based program, sometimes it's a small group in the classroom, sometimes it could be additional support by one of those campus specialists. But we use a tiered approach to make sure that we know when children are struggling and that we create a plan to help them get where they need to be. It's driven by goals and data that informs us on progress that's being made. And I guess the bigger message here is to know that there's a plan. So if your child didn't qualify or hasn't qualified for special ed, but they still need help, there's a system in place that guarantees that we're watching and that we're ready to jump in and support whenever it's needed. And then speaking of those support systems, the benefit of being in a public school setting that's prepared for the diverse children that enter, we have school counselors on our campuses. Obviously, we have administration. You can always access the district support staff. That's what Lori and I do. We have social and emotional behavioral coaches that can go out and help teachers provide support if needed. We offer a wide range of professional development, and then we can always reach out to our counterparts in special ed and get consultative support on what would be best for those tier 1 or those classroom activities, lessons, systems that we could put in place that would help our students that maybe don't qualify but just need a little extra help. So now we're going to open it up for general questions.
Great. Thank you so much, ladies. Yes, and I'm going to start the question and answer portion with 2 questions of my own. The first one being, what support and resources may be available to families and students?
I don't mind stepping in and answering that if that's okay. So in our particular district, we have a whole child department. And this includes our nurses, our counselors, family engagement, and then pre-K liaisons. So they actually work with our young students. So based on need, some of these resources are campus specific, some of them are district specific. The big message here is that they're there, right? And so while they may not be needed by all students, or families, they can be accessed by our students and our families by reaching out usually to the school counselor. Also, in that ARD process, sometimes needs will arise that are outside the scope of special ed, but where they can reach out to the counselor, the school counselor, or a member of that whole child department and give guidance on where they can access additional resources if needed.
Good, thank you. Okay, our second question that I have is, how can parents, doctors, and school staff work together to promote a child's educational success? I know that's a big one.
You know, and I'll answer that one. I would say that it's all about transparent communication. I think we work best together. There's strong collaboration when we're all in the know and we're all working towards the same goals for the child.
Thank you. Okay, so now we will end the recording of our presentation and answer your questions. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. However, if your question is not answered, you may email it to me at sifford@utsca.edu. That's sifford@uthscsa.edu. And I will forward it along to the ladies in the panel. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. And thank you so much, ladies, for that. We did post in the chat the links to the two documents that were referenced in the presentation. One is the Procedural Safeguards, and the other is the Guide to the ARD process. It does have some good information. It's a good place to start to kind of learn more about all of that lingo that is used in the school and the processes involved. I know we have limited time for questions, so as I stated, feel free to email me any questions we don't get to, and I'll pass those along to the ladies. I know there's been some questions about still confusion between medical diagnoses and eligibility. So if you guys wanted to speak more on that, how someone who has a medical diagnosis may not qualify or become eligible for services at school.
I can address that, Sarah, for the panel. So it's based on the educational needs of the child and their access to their general education. So, for example, as we had a child, one of the parents speak about their child with an orthopedic impairment. So that child has a medical diagnosis of cerebral palsy, which translates into an orthopedic impairment, disability, or eligibility for services because that child requires accommodations and modifications above and beyond what's available in the general education setting in order to access their free and appropriate public education. On the other hand, we sometimes meet children who have a medical diagnosis of an attention deficit disorder, which includes oftentimes distractibility, increased activity level in the classroom. Now, for that child, they may not need special education services because they might benefit from and have access to their free and appropriate public education in the general education setting with minor adjustments to their environment. So for example, being able to stand up and move about their environment, making sure that if this is a young learner that they're not being asked to complete worksheets at a table for 20 or 30 minutes, which would be developmentally inappropriate. So those are things that would not require special education support of a child with an attention deficit disorder if the symptoms are can be managed through some of those environmental changes. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Joanna. And I know Dr. Harden asked, how else can healthcare providers specifically document and advocate for patients to be eligible for necessary services and accommodations at school?
That's a very hard question. So as we know in the school system, we look at each child individually. and we have to translate medical needs into educational needs. And so I think there needs to be an understanding that when a child has medical needs, that those be clearly outlined, and then allow the school staff to translate those into educational needs. And sometimes they're going to work together side by side, sometimes they're going to overlap. And so when they overlap is when we bring in that special education support. But absolutely talking to parents about what's the symptoms of their child's condition, what the impact is. And then school systems do have, we are required to include a physician as part of the evaluation team when there is a medical condition. So making yourselves available for conversations, or just some of the paperwork that we request sometimes. I know, it can be time consuming, but that can be invaluable input from the physician in helping the school system translate that medical diagnosis into that educational disability.
I know that there's been a lot mentioned about advocates, especially from the family panel. Can you speak some about the place of advocates in the school processes?
Since I'm the evaluation specialist on this panel, I'll address that as well. I think anybody that has their best interest at heart for the child and the family is an advocate for the child, and should certainly be part of the conversation. One of the parents asked, should the school system be telling the parents about advocates? The difficult part is that the realm of advocacy is not a licensed or regulated field, and so anyone can call themselves an advocate. So that is not something that the school district would be held to that standard of passing that information along. I think that is more of a more important community conversation amongst parents who maybe have had similar experiences. Some of the resources that were shared earlier is a better place to get that information. In the world of the school system and the medical system, we are all licensed, and we have, our professional educational development courses that we attend, and so we very much kind of work in a system that's that has some requirements for who we would kind of propose to be part of the formal team. Whereas in the world of advocacy, it's not regulated by the state or any organization, and so that makes it a little tricky. We want parents to know that they can come to us with any questions and any concerns. And I think we all in the education system would consider ourselves advocates for our children that we service, as should all parents, because they absolutely are the first and best advocates for their parents. But the field of advocacy it's a little tricky.
Okay, and there was a question about can you comment on how many special education teachers and speech therapists, physical therapists, OTs are available on campuses in general?
So I probably should answer that question. I can speak for ECSE programming, and out of the 80-something elementary schools, most of our campuses do have an ECSE teacher, if not more than one. It really just depends on the number of, it kind of depends on the number of students per campus. So in some scenarios, in some areas of town, there are not enough students to support a whole classroom. So we have clustered those students. So it just really depends on the need in that area of the district. But most of our schools do have an ECSE teacher. Now, and most of our schools, all of them, have speech pathologists. That's a huge need. And again, it's based on the number of speech pathologists on a campus, depend on the number of students at that school receiving services. And it is looked at every single year to determine the number of staff that'll be there for the following year based on need. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, those are not housed on the campus. They're housed at a central location in our district, and they go out as needed to the schools.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
In Northside, our pre-K classrooms, we do offer a collaborative setting. And as part of that collaborative setting, the pre-K teacher is also special ed certified. So while she's not considered the ECSE teacher and the caseworker for that particular child, she is trained, supported, and certified to meet the needs of her special ed students as well as the gen ed students that are in that classroom.
Okay, thank you. I think we are about out of time, so lots of great questions. We hope you found our presentation helpful. If you have a question that you still would like answered, again, please feel free to email that to me. My email is in the chat. It's sifford@utasca.edu. Okay, thank you so much for your time.